My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 36 years old. And until last year I believed my marriage was stable, maybe a little predictable, but stable. My wife Sarah Reynolds and I had been together since we were teenagers. We met when we were both 18 at a small college orientation event in Birmingham. We were each other's first serious relationship, first love, and eventually first everything else. By the time most of our friends were still figuring out dating, Sarah and I were already talking about the future. We got married young, at 23, right after graduation. At the time it felt romantic and certain, like we had skipped all the uncertainty other couples go through. We built our life carefully. I worked as an IT technician for a logistics company, while Sarah became a project coordinator for a marketing firm. We bought a modest house, adopted a cat named Luna, and settled into routines that felt safe and familiar. Looking back now, I realize our relationship had become what people call vanilla, though I never thought of it that way at the time. We didn't argue much, but we also didn't experiment with much in life either. Date nights were usually dinner at the same restaurant. Vacations were quiet beach trips. Even our conversations followed predictable patterns about work, bills, and weekend plans. I thought that kind of comfort meant our marriage was healthy. Sarah, apparently, felt something very different. About 2 years ago, Sarah started a new job at a marketing agency in the city centre. She seemed excited at first, because the office culture was much younger and more energetic than her old job. She began mentioning co-workers with enthusiasm, especially one colleague named Ethan Walker. At first it sounded normal. She said Ethan was funny, creative, and helped her adjust to the new workplace. I didn't think much of it, but over time I noticed subtle changes. Sarah began staying late at work more often for brainstorming sessions or after-hours drinks with the team. She started dressing differently for work too, nothing inappropriate, just more stylish than before. I remember teasing her once, saying, "You're dressing like a marketing executive now." She laughed, but didn't really respond. Around the same time, she began making comments about our life together that caught me off guard. One night during dinner, she asked if I ever felt like we had missed out on experiences by marrying so young. I said I didn't think so. I felt lucky we had found each other early instead of wasting years dating the wrong people. She nodded, but seemed thoughtful in a way that made me uncomfortable. A few weeks later, she asked if I had ever been curious about what dating other people is have been like before we met. That question stayed in my mind 4 days. Despite those conversations, life continued normally 4 months. Then small details began piling up. Sarah would smile at her phone when messages arrived. She started going to the gym to work with co-workers, something she'd never done before. She talked about Ethan often, his jokes, his ideas for campaigns, how confident he was in meetings. I remember joking once, "Sounds like Ethan's the star of the office." She shrugged and said he was just interesting to talk to. I trusted her completely, so I pushed away any suspicion. After all, we had been together nearly 15 years. I believed that kind of history meant something. The first moment that truly unsettled me happened during a company party I attended as Sarah's guest. It was a rooftop gathering with music, drinks, and the entire marketing team celebrating a big campaign launch. That night I finally met Ethan in person. He was charismatic in the way some people naturally are, tall, confident, quick with jokes. He greeted me warmly and thanked me for letting Sarah spend so many late nights saving our projects. The comment sounded harmless, but the way Sarah laughed at everything he said caught my attention. They had an easy chemistry that made me feel oddly like an outsider watching them interact. Later that evening I noticed them talking in a corner for nearly half an hour. When I walked over, their conversation stopped abruptly. Sarah introduced me again, if I hadn't already been standing there earlier. It was a small moment, but something about it felt wrong. After that night, I couldn't ignore the changes anymore. Sarah was distant at home, distracted during conversations, and constantly on her phone. When I asked how work was going, she gave shorter answers than before. Our routines became quieter and more mechanical. I suggested planning a vacation together, Maybe somewhere adventurous, like hiking in Iceland. She smiled politely, but said she was too busy with upcoming projects. A few weeks later, she told me she'd be attending a weekend team retreat outside the city. Something about the situation made my stomach uneasy. But again, I convinced myself I was overthinking things. The truth came out unexpectedly. One evening I borrowed Sarah's laptop because mine had crashed while I was finishing some freelance IT work. Her email account was still logged in. I wasn't looking for anything suspicious. I simply opened the browser to access a document editor. But a message notification popped up at the corner of the screen from Ethan. I wish I could say I ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The preview line read, "I still can't stop thinking about last night." My heart started pounding as I opened the conversation thread. The messages weren't explicit, but the meaning was unmistakable. They talked about how exciting their secret felt, how different things were compared to their normal lives, and how Sarah felt like she had missed out on exploring life before marriage. Ethan responded that she deserved to experience more than routine and predictability. The final message from Sarah said, "Being with you makes me feel like I'm discovering a part of myself I never knew existed. I felt like the ground had disappeared under my feet." 15 years together, and I was learning about my wife's secret relationship through a laptop notification. When Sarah came home later that evening, was sitting in the living room holding the computer. She immediately knew something was wrong. I asked her calmly if there was anything she wanted to tell me. At first she denied everything, insisting Ethan was just a co-worker and the messages were jokes taken out of context. But when I showed her the conversation thread, she broke down crying. She admitted the emotional relationship had started months earlier and eventually turned into something more during late nights at the office and that weekend retreat. She said she never planned for it to happen, but felt drawn to the excitement and novelty of being with someone new after spending her entire adult life with only one partner. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the explanation. Sarah told me she loved me, but felt our marriage had become too predictable, too safe, like we were playing roles instead of living fully. She said she had always wondered what it would be like to date someone else, to experience the kind of passionate uncertainty other people go through before settling down. Ethan, according to her, represented that missing chapter of life. I asked her why she never talked to me honestly about those feelings instead of acting on them behind my back. She said she was afraid I wouldn't understand and that she didn't want to destroy our marriage. The following weeks were a blur of painful conversations. Sarah insisted the affair made her realize how complicated her feelings were about our marriage. She said she still cared deeply about me, but wasn't sure whether the life we built together was enough for her anymore. I felt like I was competing with an idea rather than a person. The idea of excitement, freedom, and experiences we never had because we married young. Eventually she admitted the relationship with Ethan had become serious enough that she didn't want to end it immediately. That moment broke something inside me. I realized the person I had trusted for nearly half my life was choosing uncertainty with someone else over the stability we had built together. A year has passed since that night. Sarah and I eventually separated while she continued her relationship with Ethan. Friends and family were shocked because we had always seemed like the dependable couple who would grow old together. Some people told me I should have tried harder to make our marriage more exciting, as if the betrayal was partly my fault for being too safe. Others said Sarah was simply chasing something unrealistic after spending her youth in one relationship. I still don't know which explanation is closer to the truth. What I do know is that the quiet, predictable life I thought was a strength of our marriage turned out to be the very thing that pushed Sarah to look elsewhere. Now I'm left wondering whether stability is enough for a relationship to survive, or whether some people eventually crave the experiences they never had. My name is Andrew Bennett. I'm 34 years old now, and the life I have today would probably surprise anyone who knew me when I was 16. I have a wife I adore, 2 young daughters, a steady career, and a quiet house filled with the kind of peace I used to dream about when I slept on park benches. But the reason I ended up there, the reason I had to rebuild my life from nothing, started with a lie my cousin told when we were teenagers. A lie that destroyed my family, my reputation, and nearly my entire future before I was even old enough to vote. Growing up, my family was everything to me. My parents, David and Carol Bennett, were strict but proud of our reputation in the small town where we lived. My cousin Olivia Grant lived nearby with her parents, my mum's sister and her husband. Olivia and I had grown up together like siblings. We spent holidays together, shared family barbecues every summer, and saw each other almost every weekend. She was a year younger than me, dramatic and always craving attention. Even when we were kids, she had a habit of exaggerating stories just to make people react. But no one ever thought that traits would turn into something dangerous. When I was 16 and Olivia was 15, everything fell apart. One afternoon, my parents called me into the living room with expressions I had never seen before: anger, shock, and something like disgust. Sitting there were my aunt, my uncle, and Olivia herself, crying hysterically. Before I could even ask what was happening, my father asked me one question in a voice I barely recognized. "What did you do to her?" I had no idea what he meant. Then my aunt started shouting, saying Olivia had told them that I had forced myself on her during a family gathering a few days earlier when everyone else was outside. I remember feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I kept repeating that it wasn't true, that nothing like that had ever happened, but no one wanted to hear it. Olivia was sobbing so convincingly that every word I said sounded like a lie to them. Within hours my life collapsed. My father told me to pack a bag and leave the house. He said he couldn't have someone like me under his roof until the situation was sorted out. My mother wouldn't even look at me. The next day, rumors spread through our town faster than I thought possible. People whispered when I walked past them. Friends stopped answering my messages. Even teachers treated me differently at school. I was never formally charged because there was no evidence. But in a small community, accusations alone were enough to destroy someone. My parents refused to let me come home, saying they couldn't risk having people think they were defending a predator. So at 16 years old, I left with a backpack and nowhere to go. The first months were the hardest thing I've ever endured. I slept wherever I could: bus stations, parks, sometimes the couch of a classmate whose parents didn't know I was there. Eventually, I dropped out of school because I couldn't keep up with classes while trying to survive. I worked odd jobs, washing dishes, cleaning construction sites, or carrying boxes for small shops in exchange for a little money or a meal. There were days when I had to stand outside grocery stores asking strangers if they could spare a few dollars so I could eat. The humiliation of that still burns in my memory. What hurt more than the hunger or the cold nights was knowing that my own family believed the worst thing about me without even giving me a chance to defend myself. For 2 years, I lived like that, drifting between temporary jobs and cheap motels whenever I could afford them. Slowly, through sheer stubbornness, things started to improve. A construction foreman named Mark Dalton noticed that I worked harder than most of the adults on the crew and offered me a full-time position. He never asked about my past. He just cared that I showed up every day and did the job right. With steady income, I managed to rent a tiny room in a shared house and eventually finish my GED at night school. It wasn't the life I had imagined as a kid, but it was the first time I felt like I might actually build something stable. When I was 23, Rachel Collins, the woman who would eventually become my wife, we met at a small bookstore where she worked part-time while studying nursing. Rachel had this calm kindness about her that made people feel safe talking to her. After a few months of dating, I knew I had to tell her about my past. I expected her to leave immediately once she heard the accusation, but instead she listened quietly while I explained everything: the accusation, my family throwing me out, the years I spent struggling just to survive. When I finished, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget: "People who are guilty usually hide their past. You faced yours head on. I believe you." That moment changed my life more than she probably realized. Rachel became my strongest supporter. She encouraged me to keep improving my life, helped me apply for training programs, and stood by me when the memories of those years still haunted me. I eventually started my own small renovation business using the construction skills I'd learned. It grew slowly but steadily until I had a reliable team and enough income to buy a modest home. Rachel and I got married when I was 27, and within a few years, we welcomed two daughters into the world. Holding my first child was the moment I realized I had truly escaped the darkness of my past. I had built a family of my own, one based on trust and love instead of judgment. But the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. About 3 years ago, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Olivia. I hadn't spoken to her since the day my parents threw me out. Her message was short and awkward, asking if we could talk. My first reaction was anger, so strong I had to put my phone down. Rachel saw my expression and asked what was wrong. When I explained who had contacted me, her face hardened in a way I rarely see. Rachel had always been furious about what my family did to me, even though she had never met them. She said it was my decision whether to respond, but she warned me that people who destroy someone's life don't deserve easy forgiveness. A week later, Olivia sent another message. This time she explained why she was reaching out. She said she had been living with guilt for years and couldn't stay silent anymore. She admitted that the accusation she made against me when we were teenagers had been completely false. According to her, she had been desperate for attention at the time and angry that her parents were focusing more on her older brother's achievements than on her. During a family argument, she blurted out the lie without thinking about the consequences, assuming it would create sympathy for her. When everyone immediately believed her and the situation spiraled out of control, she panicked and kept repeating the story because she didn't know how to admit the truth. Over time, the lie became too big for her to undo without destroying her own relationship with the family. Reading that confession felt surreal. For years, I had imagined hearing those words, that it was all a lie, but by the time they finally arrived, my life had already moved on. I showed the messages to Rachel, and she was furious in a way I had never seen before. She said the confession might ease Olivia's conscience, but it didn't erase the years I spent homeless or the childhood I lost because my family chose to believe an accusation without evidence. Rachel had stood beside me through every nightmare story from my past, and she carried her own anger about it. To her, the idea that my parents had abandoned their teenage son so easily was unforgivable. Eventually, Olivia asked if she could tell the rest of the family the truth. I told her she could do whatever she felt was right, but I wasn't interested in rebuilding those relationships. Months later, I received messages from my parents and several relatives apologizing and asking to reconnect now that they knew the truth. By then, however, my life was full in ways I had never expected. I had a loving wife, children who looked up to me, and a career built entirely by my own effort. The people who had once turned their backs on me suddenly wanted to be part of my life again, but the years of silence had created a distance that couldn't simply be erased. Rachel supported whatever decision I made, but she was honest about her feelings. She said she couldn't imagine welcoming people into our lives who had allowed a teenager to end up on the streets without even listening to his side of the story. Watching her defend me so fiercely made me realize how lucky I was to have found someone who valued truth and loyalty the way she did. In the end, I chose to keep my distance from most of my family. I wished them well, but I made it clear that the life I built without them was the one I intended to keep protecting. Now, when I look at my daughters playing in our living room, I sometimes think about how close I came to losing everything before I even had a chance to begin. A single lie nearly destroyed my future, but the years that followed also showed me something important. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by the people who stand beside you when the truth is hard and the world is against you. For me, that person was Rachel. Without her belief in me, I might never have fully recovered from what happened all those years ago. And while my cousin's confession may have finally revealed the truth, the real victory was building a life strong enough that the lie no longer controls my story. My name is M. I'm 38 years old, and the story we're about to tell is something that, for a long time, I wasn't sure I would ever share with anyone outside my closest circle. Even now, I'm using initials because the people involved have families, careers, and lives that still exist beyond what happened. But the truth is that betrayal doesn't just break a relationship, it changes how you see trust, loyalty, and even yourself. I met my wife A when we were both in our mid-20s. We worked in the same large insurance company, but in different departments. I was in data analytics, the quiet kind of job where you sit behind screens and spreadsheets all day, while A worked in client relations, where her personality could shine. She was charismatic, confident, and the type of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. I was the opposite, introverted, cautious, someone who preferred small circles and predictable routines. Somehow, that difference worked for us. She liked that I was steady and reliable, and I admired her ability to bring energy into every situation. We dated for 3 years before getting married, and for most of that time, our relationship felt balanced. She pulled me out of my shell, and I grounded her when things became chaotic. For the first 5 years of our marriage, life was relatively simple. We bought a modest home in a quiet suburb, adopted a rescue dog named Atlas, and built careers that slowly but steadily improved. A began rising through the ranks at her company because she was excellent with clients, and eventually she became a regional sales manager. That job meant more travel, more networking events, and more late nights entertaining potential clients. I supported her ambition because I was proud of her success. When she talked about meetings or conferences, I listened with genuine interest, even though the corporate networking world she described felt completely foreign to me. Looking back, I can pinpoint when the distance between us began to grow. It started gradually when A was assigned to lead a large partnership project with another firm. She began mentioning a colleague from that company named, or at first it sounded harmless. She described him as talented, ambitious, and easy to work with. Their project required frequent communication, and she sometimes took calls with him late in the evening to coordinate schedules across different time zones. I didn't think anything of it, because that kind of collaboration was normal in her role. But over time, his name appeared more often in our conversations. She'd mention that I had recommended a restaurant during a work trip, or that he had an interesting perspective during a strategy meeting. About a year into that project, I started noticing subtle changes in AS behavior. She was still affectionate, but there was a distraction in her eyes when we talked. She'd be scrolling through her phone while I was explaining something about my day, occasionally smiling at messages before putting the phone down quickly when she realized I noticed. I remember asking once, half jokingly, "Is he sending you another brilliant business idea?" She laughed and said he was just venting about a difficult client. I believed her because I had never had a reason to trust her. The first moment that truly unsettled me happened during a company awards gala that A invited me to attend. It was held in a large hotel ballroom filled with hundreds of professionals celebrating the year's successes. That night I met R for the first time. He was confident in a way that filled the room, tall, well-dressed, and comfortable speaking to anyone. When A introduced us, he shook my hand firmly and complimented me on supporting A's demanding career. On the surface, everything seemed polite, but there was a familiarity between them that caught my attention. They finished each other's sentences and laughed at private jokes that I didn't understand. At one point during the evening, I watched them standing close together while discussing a project. The way they leaned toward each other made my chest tighten with a feeling I couldn't quite name at the time. After that night, the distance between us slowly grew more obvious. AS business trips became more frequent, and she seemed emotionally exhausted when she returned home. Sometimes she'd say she needed a quiet night alone after dealing with clients all day. Our conversations became shorter and more practical bills, schedules, errands, while the deeper connection we once had faded into something mechanical. I tried to fix it in small ways by planning weekend getaways or suggesting new activities we could try together, but she often said she was too tired or busy with work deadlines. The truth came out in a way that felt almost surreal. One evening, A left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she took a call in the other room. A message notification popped up on the screen from her. I didn't intend to read it, but the preview line caught my attention. It said, "I wish we didn't have to hide this." My stomach dropped. Against my better judgment, I opened the conversation thread. The messages revealed a relationship that had clearly gone far beyond professional collaboration. They talked about nights during conferences when they stayed up in hotel lounges long after other colleagues had gone to bed. They reminisced about a weekend trip that was supposedly a client retreat, but clearly involved only the two of them exploring a city together. The tone of the messages was intimate, affectionate, and unmistakably romantic. When A returned to the kitchen, she immediately saw the laptop in front of me and knew something was wrong. I asked her directly if she was having an affair with her. For a moment, she tried to deny it, saying the messages were exaggerated and emotional because of stress from work. But when I showed her the conversation thread, her expression changed. She sat down across from me and admitted that the relationship had started emotionally months earlier and eventually became physical during one of their conferences. According to her, the connection felt exciting and unpredictable compared to the stability of our life together. She said that spending so much time traveling and solving problems with her created a bond that slowly crossed boundaries she never expected to cross. Hearing those words felt like watching the foundation of my life crack open. 4 years, I believed our marriage was built on trust and partnership. Yet the person I trusted most had created an entirely separate relationship hidden inside her professional life. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was realizing that the late nights, the trips, and the conversations I had supported were the very opportunities that allowed the affair to grow. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to explain her feelings. She said she still cared about me deeply, but had become confused about what she wanted from life. The excitement and spontaneity she experienced with R made her question whether our stable routine was enough for a long term. She insisted the affair had never been planned. It simply developed from constant proximity and emotional vulnerability during stressful projects. I asked her why she hadn't talked to me about feeling disconnected before turning to someone else. She said she didn't want to hurt me or risk our marriage by admitting she was unhappy. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. Our relationship had changed in ways that couldn't easily be repaired. After months of painful conversations and counseling attempts, we decided to separate. It wasn't the dramatic ending I once imagined betrayal would bring. There were no screaming matches or public confrontations. Instead, there was a quiet recognition that the trust between us had been damaged deeply. 2 years have passed since then. Our divorce was finalized last year, and we've both moved forward with our lives in different ways. I've focused on rebuilding my sense of stability and learning how to trust again, something that doesn't happen overnight after a betrayal like that. From what I hear through mutual acquaintances, A and R eventually tried to build a relationship outside the secrecy of the workplace. Whether it succeeded or failed isn't something I follow closely anymore. What I've learned from the experience is that relationships rarely collapse from a single moment of betrayal. More often, they erode slowly through distance, unspoken doubts, and choices made quietly behind closed doors. When trust finally breaks, it feels sudden, but in reality, the cracks have been forming for a long time. My name is Jay. I'm 35 now, and the story I'm about to share is something that permanently changed how I define the word family. Growing up, I believed family meant loyalty above everything else. It meant the people who would protect you when the world turned against you. But the hardest lesson I've ever learned is that sometimes the people who betray you the most deeply are the same ones who raised you. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood with my parents R&D and my older brother K. We were the kind of family that looked perfect from the outside. My father ran a small construction supply business that my grandfather started decades earlier. My mother handled most of the finances and bookkeeping for the company, while also keeping our household running smoothly. From an early age, it was assumed that one day my brother and I would help run the family business together. Kay was 4 years older than me, confident and outgoing, the type of person who could easily talk to customers and make deals. I was quieter and more analytical, the one who preferred organizing inventory systems and managing the numbers behind the scenes. My parents often said we would make the perfect team someday. Throughout my childhood, I looked up to Kay. He was the older brother who taught me how to ride a bike, defended me from bullies at school, and convinced our parents to let me tag along when he and his friends went camping. Because of that history, I never imagined a future where we wouldn't trust each other completely. Even when we grew older and our personalities became more different, I believed that shared loyalty would always hold us together. After finishing college with a degree in business administration, I returned home at 23 and started working full-time at my father's company. The plan was simple: learn every aspect of the operation and eventually take over alongside my brother. For the next several years, I dedicated nearly all my energy to helping the business grow. I modernized the inventory system, created digital records for suppliers, and improved the accounting processes that had previously been handled mostly on paper. The improvements worked. Within 5 years, the company's revenue nearly doubled, and we started gaining contracts with larger construction firms across the region. During that time, my brother focused on sales and relationships with clients, which he was naturally talented at. He traveled frequently to meet contractors, negotiate deals, and represent the company at industry events. I admired his ability to bring in new business, and he often credited me for making the operational side efficient enough to handle the growth. Our parents seemed proud that the company my grandfather started was thriving under the next generation. But as the business expanded, subtle tensions began to appear. Kay started making larger financial decisions without always consulting me first. Sometimes he would promise discounts or special arrangements to clients that complicated our accounting structure. When I questioned these choices, he brushed them off as necessary risks to secure major contracts. Our father usually sided with him because Kay's outgoing personality reminded him of his own younger days. I tried not to take it personally, but I noticed my role slowly shifting from partner to something closer to a behind-the-scenes employee. Around that time, my parents began talking more seriously about transferring ownership of the business. The expectation had always been that Kay and I would eventually share it equally. Because of that assumption, I never questioned how the legal arrangements were being structured. I trusted that my parents would follow through with what they had promised us since childhood. Looking back, that trust was my biggest mistake. The betrayal revealed itself gradually through small inconsistencies. One afternoon, I was reviewing supplier invoices when I noticed a new corporate account had been opened under a slightly different company name. The structure looked similar to ours, but with Kay listed as the sole director. At first I assumed it was a temporary subsidiary created for tax purposes or a specific contract. When I asked my brother about it, he gave a vague explanation about restructuring the business to attract investors. He assured me everything was still part of the same family operation, but something about the explanation didn't sit right with me. Over the next few weeks, I quietly reviewed more documents and financial records. What I discovered left me stunned. The new company wasn't just a subsidiary, it had been absorbing many of our largest contracts and assets. Equipment that technically belonged to the original family business had been transferred into the new entity. Several of our biggest clients were now signing agreements directly with Kay's new company instead of the one my father owned. When I confronted my parents about it, the conversation took a turn I never expected. My father admitted that they had helped Kay create the new structure months earlier. According to them, the plan was to gradually transition the entire operation under my brother's leadership. They believed he was better suited to run the business long term because of his strong sales skills and charismatic personality. My role, they explained, would continue as a senior manager within the company rather than an equal partner. I remember sitting there in silence as the realization hit me. 4 years I had worked tirelessly under the assumption that I was helping build something that would belong to both of us. Meanwhile, my own family had been quietly arranging a future where I had no ownership at all. When I asked why no one had told me earlier, my father said they didn't want unnecessary conflict between the brothers. My mother added that they believed I would understand once everything was finalized. Understand. That word echoed in my mind 4 days afterward. They expected me to accept that the business I helped grow would ultimately belong only to my brother. Every long night organizing finances, every weekend spent solving operational problems, none of it mattered in the final decision. The betrayal didn't just come from Kay. It came from the parents I trusted to treat their children fairly. The following months were some of the most difficult of my life. I tried to continue working at the company, but the environment had changed completely. My brother now acted as my superior rather than my partner. Important decisions were made without my input. Even employees who once treated me as part of leadership began looking to him for direction instead. The situation became unbearable. Eventually, I made the decision to leave. With the experience I had gained managing operations and logistics, I applied for a position at a larger construction supply distributor in another city. They offered me a management role that allowed me to implement many of the systems I had developed at the family company. Moving away was painful, but it also gave me the distance I needed to rebuild my identity outside of my family's expectations. Over the next several years, my career grew in ways I never anticipated. The company I joined valued my analytical approach to operations and eventually was promoted to regional director, overseeing multiple distribution centers. During that time, I also met my partner Al, who supported me through the lingering anger and disappointment I carried from the betrayal. With her encouragement, I began to see that leaving my family's business had actually freed me to create opportunities on my own terms. Ironically, the family company didn't thrive as smoothly as everyone expected. Without the operational systems I had built, several logistical problems started affecting deliveries and inventory management. I occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that the business struggled to maintain the same growth rate after I left. Whether that situation improved later isn't something I follow closely anymore. Today, I still speak to my parents occasionally during holidays, but the relationship is distant. Trust, once broken in that way, is difficult to rebuild completely. My brother and I rarely communicate at all. The bond we shared growing up, bike rides, camping trips, childhood memories, feels like it belongs to another lifetime. The hardest part about family betrayal is that it doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you believed would always stand beside you, yet in an unexpected way. That experience forced me to build a life based entirely on my own abilities rather than inherited expectations. And while the betrayal still hurts when I think about it, it also reminds me that sometimes the path you're pushed off of becomes the one that leads you somewhere better. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and treated people fairly, your career would naturally move in the right direction. I learned the hard way that workplaces don't always reward integrity the way we expect them to. Sometimes the biggest challenges aren't the work itself, but the politics, ambition, and quiet rivalries that exist between colleagues who are all competing for the same opportunities. I started working at a mid-sized technology consulting firm when I was 26, just a year after finishing my degree in information systems. The company wasn't a giant corporation, but it had a strong reputation for helping businesses modernize their digital infrastructure. When I joined, I was eager to prove myself. I took on every project I could, volunteered for extra responsibilities, and stayed late whenever deadlines approached. I wasn't the loudest or most charismatic employee in the office, but I believed that consistency and reliability would eventually speak for themselves. During my second year there, a new hire joined the company, Lucas Shaw. Lucas was a few years older than me and had previously worked at a larger consulting firm in another city. From the moment he arrived, he stood out. He was confident, extremely articulate, and had a way of presenting ideas that made people immediately pay attention. In meetings, he could break down complicated technical concepts into simple explanations that clients appreciated. Because of that skill, management quickly placed him on high-profile projects. At first, I actually liked working with him. Our roles complemented each other well. Lucas was excellent at communicating with clients and presenting strategic ideas, while I was strong on the technical implementation side. Several of our early projects succeeded because we combined those strengths effectively. After a few months, our manager even described us as one of the most productive pairs in the department. But as time went on, I began noticing subtle patterns in how our work was presented to upper management. When we completed a project successfully, Lucas often delivered the final presentation to executives. During those meetings, he spoke confidently about the strategy and outcomes, but he rarely mentioned how much of the technical planning and development had come from my side of the work. At first, I assumed it was just an oversight. After all, he was the one assigned to communicate with leadership, so it made sense that he handled the presentations. The situation became more complicated when the company announced a major internal restructuring. They planned to create a new position called Senior Project Lead, someone responsible for overseeing multiple consulting teams and managing large client accounts. It was the kind of promotion that could significantly accelerate someone's career. Several people in our department were considered candidates, including Lucas and me. During the months leading up to that decision, competition inside the office became more obvious. People who were once casual colleagues suddenly paid closer attention to each other's achievements. Projects that previously felt collaborative started to feel like quiet contests. I tried to stay focused on my work rather than the politics around me, believing that consistent results would speak louder than office maneuvering. Around that time, Lucas and I were assigned to what would become the most important project of the year, helping a national retail chain build its outdated inventory management system. The project involved coordinating with dozens of store locations, integrating multiple software platforms, and training staff across several regions. It was incredibly complex, but also a huge opportunity for whoever led it successfully. From the beginning, the workload was intense. Lucas handled most of the communication with the client's executive team, while I spent countless hours designing the technical framework that would allow their existing systems to transition smoothly into the new platform. Many nights I stayed at the office long after others had left, troubleshooting data migration issues and refining the architecture so the system wouldn't crash once it went live. Lucas often thanked me for the effort and told me the project wouldn't succeed without my expertise. The final rollout happened nearly 9 months after we started. It went remarkably well. The new system reduced the client's inventory errors by nearly 40% and allowed them to track shipments across all locations in real time. Their executives were thrilled, and our company gained a major success story that would attract future contracts. A few weeks after the rollout, the leadership team scheduled a presentation where the project results would be reviewed internally. I expected Lucas and I would present together, since we had worked so closely throughout the process. Instead, our manager told me that Lucas would handle the presentation alone because he had already built relationships with the client's executives. I didn't argue because I trusted that my contributions were already understood by the leadership team. That assumption turned out to be completely wrong. During the presentation, Lucas spoke about the project in detail, but the story he told made it sound like he had personally designed most of the strategy and technical framework. When he briefly mentioned the implementation phase, he referred to it as work completed by the support team, which included me and several other developers. Sitting in the back of the conference room, listening to that description felt surreal. The system architecture he was describing was something I had spent months designing almost entirely on my own. After the meeting, I confronted him privately. I asked why he hadn't acknowledged the role I played in building the technical side of the project. He responded calmly and said that presentations needed to stay simple and focused. According to him, mentioning to many contributors would confuse executives who were primarily interested in leadership and strategy. He assured me that management knew how valuable my work was behind the scenes. Unfortunately, what management actually saw was a confident presenter who appeared to have led one of the company's most successful projects of the year. 2 weeks later, the promotion decision was announced. Lucas was chosen as the new senior project lead. When the news spread through the office, many colleagues congratulated him enthusiastically. Some even assumed I must be thrilled because our project had played such a big role in his success. I forced a polite smile, but inside I felt a mixture of frustration and disappointment. It wasn't just about missing the promotion, it was the realization that the narrative surrounding our work had been shaped in a way that minimized my contributions. Over the following months, Lucas's new position placed him directly above several teams, including mine. The dynamic between us changed immediately. Where we once collaborated as partners, he now assigned tasks and evaluated performance. Our conversations became more formal, and the easy camaraderie we once had slowly disappeared. That period forced me to reflect on what I wanted from my career. I could stay at the company and continue working under someone who had essentially built his advancement on work we shared, or I could search for a place where my skills might be recognized more clearly. Eventually, I chose the second option. I began quietly applying for positions at other firms, and within a few months received an offer from a larger consulting company that specialized in large-scale infrastructure projects. During the interview process, I was able to speak directly about the systems I had designed and the challenges I had solved. The hiring managers were far more interested in technical expertise than presentation style. Accepting that offer was one of the most difficult but important decisions of my career. Leaving meant walking away from a company where I had spent nearly a decade building relationships and experience. But it also meant stepping into an environment where my contributions would be evaluated more transparently. Looking back now, I don't think Lucas was necessarily a villain. He was ambitious and understood how corporate recognition works better than I did at the time. He knew that visibility and storytelling often matter as much as the work itself. That doesn't make what happened fair, but it explains why it happened. The experience taught me something valuable about professional life. Hard work is essential, but it's not the only factor that shapes a career. How your work is communicated, who receives the credit, and how leadership perceives your role can be just as important. Learning that lesson was painful, but it ultimately pushed me toward opportunities where my strengths could stand on their own. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 41 years old now, and about 6 years ago life changed in a way that most people only imagine happening to someone else. I won the lottery. Not the kind where you get a few $1,000s and go on a nice vacation. I'm talking about the kind that completely reshapes your life. But what no one really tells you is that the hardest part about winning a massive amount of money isn't managing the money itself. It's managing the people around you afterward. Before all of this happened, my life was extremely ordinary. I worked as a warehouse logistics coordinator for a regional distribution company in Ohio. My job involved managing shipment schedules, tracking inventory, and making sure deliveries arrived where they were supposed to. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable. I earned enough to support my wife Laura and our 2 kids, and we lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Our biggest financial stress was usually figuring out how to balance school expenses, car payments, and the occasional home repair that seemed to appear at the worst possible time. Like many people, I occasionally bought a lottery ticket when the jackpot climbed into the hundreds of millions. It was more of a small ritual than a serious expectation. On Friday evenings after work, I'd stop by the convenience store near my house, buy a ticket, and joke with the cashier about what I'd do if I ever won. My usual answer was that I'd pay off the house, help my parents retire comfortably, and maybe finally take the family on the kind of vacation we'd only seen in travel commercials. One Saturday morning in late spring, I woke up earlier than usual and remembered the ticket sitting on the kitchen counter. Laura was still asleep, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled out my phone, opened the lottery results page, and started checking the numbers one by one. The first two matched, then the third. I remember pausing and thinking it was probably just coincidence, because matching a few numbers happens sometimes. But when the fourth and fifth numbers matched too, my hands started shaking. When I saw the final number also matched, I just sat there staring at the screen for several minutes because my brain refused to accept what it meant. The jackpot was $84 million. At first I thought I must have made a mistake reading the numbers, so I checked the ticket again and again. Then I checked the results on 3 different websites just to make sure the numbers hadn't been updated or corrected. Eventually I woke Laura up and told her to come look at something. She thought I was joking until she compared the ticket herself. When it finally sank in that the numbers were real, we both just started laughing in disbelief. The first few weeks after that were a whirlwind of meetings with financial advisors, lawyers, and accountants. Everyone told us the same thing: take things slowly and don't make any huge decisions immediately. We decided to accept the lump sum payment after taxes, which still left us with more money than either of us had ever imagined having. Suddenly, we had the ability to pay off our house, eliminate every debt we had, and still have enough left to secure our kids' futures. At first we tried to keep the news quiet, but that plan didn't last long. Lottery winnings become public record in many states, and within days a local newspaper published a short story announcing that someone from our town had claimed the jackpot. It didn't include our address, but it did include our names and a photo from the press conference the Lottery Commission encouraged winners to attend. Once that article circulated online, everything changed. The first calls came from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins who had never shown much interest in my life suddenly wanted to reconnect. An uncle I barely remembered invited us to a family reunion that conveniently happened to involve discussing investment opportunities. Old high school acquaintances began sending friendly messages on social media, usually followed by stories about financial difficulties they hoped I might help solve. At first I tried to be generous. Laura and I set aside money to help our parents pay off their mortgages and retire comfortably. We also created college funds for our nieces and nephews because education had always been important to both of us. Helping family in those ways felt meaningful and responsible. But generosity has a strange effect on people's expectations. Within a few months the requests became larger and more frequent. A cousin asked for $50,000 to start a business that never seemed to move beyond the planning stage. A childhood friend asked if I could cover his medical bills, and then later hinted that I might help him buy a house too. Some people reacted with visible disappointment if the amount we offered wasn't as large as they hoped. The situation that hurt the most involved my younger brother Caleb. Growing up, we had always been close. We shared a room as kids, played on the same baseball team in high school, and talked almost every week, even as adults. When he first heard about the lottery win, he congratulated me sincerely and told me he was proud that our family finally had some financial breathing room. A few months later, he approached me with a business proposal. He wanted to open a chain of sports bars and believed the lottery money could serve as startup capital. The amount he asked for was nearly $2 million. When I told him I wasn't comfortable investing that much money into a new business venture, especially one with a high failure rate, he took the rejection personally. Our conversation quickly turned tense. He accused me of forgetting where I came from and acting like it was better than everyone else now that I was rich. Hearing that from my own brother was incredibly painful. From my perspective, I had simply tried to manage the money responsibly so it would last 4 generations. But from his perspective, my refusal looked like selfishness. After that argument, our relationship changed dramatically. Calls became less frequent, and family gatherings felt awkward. Some relatives quietly sided with him, suggesting that someone who suddenly receives millions should naturally share it more freely with family members. Others understood my concerns, but avoided taking a clear position. The experience forced Laura and me to rethink how we handled everything. Eventually, we created a structured charitable foundation where we could donate money to causes we cared about: local education programs, housing initiatives, and scholarships for students from our community. This approach allowed us to help people while maintaining clear boundaries with individuals who approached us directly for personal loans. Over time, life slowly returned to something closer to normal. I eventually left my warehouse job, but I didn't retire completely. Instead, I started a small consulting business, helping distribution companies improve their logistics systems. Working again gave me a sense of purpose and routine that money alone couldn't provide. Winning the lottery certainly solved many financial problems, but it also revealed how complicated relationships can become when money enters the equation. Some friendships grew stronger because they were built on genuine connection other than expectation. Others faded away once it became clear that I wasn't going to fund every request that came my way. If there's one thing I've learned from the experience, it's that wealth doesn't automatically create happiness or security. What it really does is magnify whatever already exists in your life, both the good and the difficult. And sometimes the hardest part of winning isn't adjusting to the money, it's adjusting to the way people change once they know you have it. My name is Michael, and for most of my life I believed that if you worked hard, stayed responsible, and treated people fairly, things would eventually balance out. I grew up in a modest household where nothing was handed to us easily. My parents taught me the value of patience and discipline, and when I eventually built a stable life for myself, it felt like the reward for years of effort. When I met my wife, Hannah, I felt like everything had fallen into place. She was kind, intelligent, and incredibly supportive. We met in our mid-20s and quickly bonded over similar goals. We both wanted stability, a quiet home, and a future we built together rather than relying on anyone else. What I didn't fully understand at the time was the complicated dynamic inside Hannah's family. Hannah was the middle child, but in many ways she carried the responsibilities of the oldest. Her parents were the kind of people who believed the youngest child should always be protected and taken care of. That youngest child was her sister, Chloe. From the outside, it looked like typical family favoritism, but the longer I knew them, the more extreme it seemed. Chloe had always been treated like she could do no wrong. If she quit school, it was because the program wasn't right for her. If she lost a job, it was because her boss didn't appreciate her. If she spent money irresponsibly, it was because she deserved to enjoy life. Meanwhile, Hannah had been working since she was 16, helping her parents pay bills while also studying. When Hannah and I got married, we started our life very simply. Our first apartment was small and honestly a little run down, but we made it our own. I worked in a logistics company and slowly climbed the ladder through promotions. Hannah worked as a graphic designer and freelanced in the evenings. 4 years, we saved almost every spare dollar we could. We didn't travel much, we didn't buy luxury things, but eventually our patience paid off. 5 years into our marriage, we bought a modest house. A few years after that, I made a smart investment with a friend and we purchased a small rental property together. It wasn't some millionaire lifestyle, but it meant we were comfortable and secure. That's when the problems with Hannah's family really started. At first the requests were small. Chloe needed help paying for a car repair. Then she needed help covering rent because she had quit another job. Hannah and I talked about it and agreed to help once or twice, believing it was temporary, but it was and single quotes every few months. There was another crisis. Another lost job. Another unpaid bill. Another request for a help. What bothered me the most wasn't Chloe asking for help, it was how her parents acted like it was our responsibility to fix her life. I remember one dinner about 2 years ago that changed everything. We were all sitting Around the table at Hannah's parents' house, the conversation started normally, enough until Chloe started talking about how difficult it was to find good opportunities. Her father suddenly looked at me and said something that completely caught me off guard. "You know, Michael," he said casually, "since you and Hannah have that rental property, maybe Chloe could move in there for a while. You could let her stay rent-free until she figures things out." I paused for a moment, unsure how to respond politely. That property wasn't just extra money for us. It was part of our long-term plan for financial security. Still, I didn't want to cause tension, so I said we'd think about it. On the drive home, Hannah was quiet. When I finally asked what she was thinking, she sighed and admitted that this kind of pressure had always been part of her life. Growing up, whenever Chloe needed something, Hannah was expected to sacrifice extra chores, giving up her own things, helping pay for things Chloe wanted. "I love my family," Hannah said softly, "but sometimes it feels like they expect me to fix everything." Over the next few weeks, the requests became more direct. Her mother called Hannah multiple times, saying Chloe was struggling emotionally and needed stability. Her father suggested that letting Chloe live in the property rent-free would be the loving thing to do, but it didn't stop there. During another visit, Chloe herself brought up the idea that the rental property would be perfect for a long-term, not temporarily, long-term. She even joked that eventually we might as well just transfer the property to her name since we were doing well anyway. I laughed awkwardly at the time, thinking she couldn't possibly be serious, but a few months later, the situation escalated even further. Chloe lost another job and moved back in with her parents. Shortly after that, Hannah's parents invited us over for dinner again. I had a strange feeling something was coming. I was right. Halfway through the meal, Hannah's mother began talking about how families should support each other and how some people are more fortunate than others. Then, her father said something that stunned me. "If anything ever happened to you too," he said, "it would make sense for your house to go to Chloe. She needs security." I sat there in silence for a few seconds, trying to process what he had just said. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were talking about our future assets, like they already belonged to Chloe. Later that night, Hannah and I had the longest conversation of our marriage. She admitted that deep down she was tired of the constant expectation that her success should always benefit Chloe. "I've worked my entire life," she said. "Why does it feel like I'm not allowed to keep anything for myself?" A few weeks later, the final straw happened. Hannah's father called us and suggested that we temporarily sign the rental property over to Chloe so she could build stability. That was when I finally said no. Not aggressively, not angrily, but firmly. I explained that we were happy to help Chloe find job opportunities or offer advice, but we were not giving away property that we had spent years working for. The reaction was immediate. Her parents accused me of being selfish. They said I was turning Hannah against her family. Chloe sent Hannah a long message saying that we clearly cared more about money than family. Even some extended relatives started saying that because we were financially stable, we should help more. Hannah has stood by me through all of it, but I can see how painful the situation is for her. She loves her parents and doesn't want to lose her relationship with them. At the same time, she knows what they're asking isn't fair. Now family gatherings are tense, and sometimes we're not even invited anymore. Part of me wonders if I could have handled things more gently. Another part of me believes that if we had given in once, it would never stop. So now I'm left wondering, was I wrong for finally drawing a boundary? Or was it the only way to protect the life Hannah and I worked so hard to build? My name is Daniel, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what I wanted most in life, I would have said something simple: a stable career, a peaceful home, and a partner who believed in building a future together. I grew up in a normal middle-class family where nothing was handed to us, but we also never went without the essentials. My parents always told me that relationships worked best when both people respected each other and grew together. For a long time, I believe that's exactly what I had with my wife, Natalie. Natalie and I met when we were both in college. She was studying marketing, and I was finishing a degree in engineering. At the time, she was confident, ambitious, and incredibly charming. She had this energy that made people gravitate toward her, and I admired that. I was always a bit quieter and more practical, so I thought we balanced each other well. We dated for 3 years before getting married, and during that time I genuinely believed she loved me for who I was. After graduation, I got a job with a construction engineering firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and had long-term stability. Natalie started working at a marketing agency, and at first everything seemed great. We rented a small apartment together and spent weekends exploring the city, cooking together, and planning our future. Back then she used to tell me how proud she was that I worked so hard, and that I was someone she could depend on. But things slowly began to change after a couple of years. Natalie started climbing the ladder quickly at her company. She got promoted twice in a relatively short period of time and began earning more than she had before. I was genuinely happy for her success. I never saw relationships as a competition. I always believed that if one of us succeeded, both of us benefited. But the more successful she became, the more her attitude toward me started to shift. At first it was small comments that I brushed off as jokes. She would say things like, "You're too comfortable staying in one place," or "You could make so much more money if you were more ambitious." I didn't take it personally because I knew my career path was slower but steady. Engineering projects take time, and promotions don't happen overnight. Then the comments became more pointed. She started comparing me to the people she worked with. Her co-workers were mostly in marketing and sales fields, where personalities are louder and competition is constant. She would come home talking about how confident and driven some of the men at her office were. One night at dinner she casually said, "Most of the guys I work with are already making 6 figures. They travel all the time and have exciting lives." I laughed and said, "Well, engineering isn't exactly the most glamorous career." She didn't laugh back. Instead she said, "That's kind of the problem." I remember that moment very clearly because it was the first time I felt like she genuinely looked down on me. Over the next year, things got worse. Natalie started going out more often with co-workers. At first it was happy hours after work, which I didn't mind, but eventually those nights turned into late evenings where she wouldn't come home until midnight or later. Whenever I asked about it, she would say I was being insecure. "You're too traditional," she told me once. Successful people network. I tried to support her career and trust her, but the dynamic between us was clearly changing. She stopped asking about my work or how my day went. When I talked about projects I was excited about, she seemed uninterested. Instead, she started criticizing everything. My job wasn't impressive enough. Our house wasn't big enough. Our lifestyle wasn't exciting enough. Eventually, she started making comments about how she felt out of place with my friends and family because they were too simple. That one hurt more than anything else because my family had always treated her like one of their own. About 2 years ago, things reached a breaking point. Natalie had just received another promotion, and her salary increased significantly. I congratulated her and suggested we celebrate that weekend. Instead of being happy, she seemed annoyed. She said something that I will never forget. "You know," she said, while scrolling through her phone, "sometimes I feel like I'm married too early." I didn't realize there were so many different kinds of people out there. At first I didn't understand what she meant, so I asked her to explain. She sighed and said, "I'm just saying that if I met you now instead of back then, I'm not sure you'd really be my type." It felt like someone punched me in the chest. I asked her directly if she thought she could do better than me. Her response was a shrug. "I mean, probably." From that moment on, the respect in our relationship seemed to disappear completely. She began talking openly about how different our levels were. She told me that the men she worked with were more ambitious, more confident, and more aligned with her lifestyle. She started dressing differently, spending more money on luxury things, and acting like she had outgrown the life we built together. What made everything worse was how she treated me around other people. At social events, she would make jokes about how I was the boring engineer husband. Her co-workers would laugh, and she would laugh with them. Every time it happened, I felt smaller and smaller. I finally confronted her one night after she came home late again. I told her that the way she talked about me and our marriage was humiliating and disrespectful. I asked her directly if she even wanted to be married anymore. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She said she felt like she had outgrown the relationship and that I was holding her back from the life she wanted. She even said that if we separated, she would probably find someone more compatible very quickly. Hearing that from the person you married is devastating. But the most surprising part came a few weeks later. Natalie started hinting that if we did divorce, she expected to keep the house because her income was now higher, and she believed she had more potential to maintain the lifestyle. That was when something inside me finally changed. 4 years I had tried to be patient and supportive, hoping the woman I married would come back, but at that moment I realized that she genuinely believed she was better than me. Not equal, better, so I told her calmly that if she truly believed she could do better, then maybe she should go find out. I suggested that we separate and start discussing divorce. Now some of our mutual friends think I gave up too quickly. They say marriages go through rough phases and that I should have tried harder to fix things. But from my perspective, it's hard to repair a relationship when one person clearly believes the other is beneath them. So now I'm wondering, was I wrong for deciding to walk away after realizing my wife thought she could do better than me? Or should I have kept trying to save the marriage anyway? I'm a 34 meters and my wife is 31F. We've been married for about 4 years. For most of our relationship, I've been the primary breadwinner. When we first got married, she had a job working at a small marketing company. It wasn't a huge salary, but it helped with bills and things felt balanced. About 2 years ago she quit because she said the job was stressing her out and affecting her mental health. I supported her decision at the time because I love her and I figured she just needed a break. We talked about her taking a few months off and then finding something else. Well, those few months turned into 2 years. During that time, I've been working full-time and recently started picking up extra shifts and freelance work to keep up with our expenses. Rent has gone up, groceries are more expensive, and we also have a car payment. I'm usually out of the house from around 7:30 a.m. until 6 or 7 p.m. most days. Meanwhile, my wife's routine has slowly turned into something that honestly frustrates me. She usually stays up very late watching shows or scrolling on her phone. Then she sleeps until noon or later. When I get home, she's usually just waking up or sitting on the couch watching TV. I've tried to gently bring up the idea of her working again multiple times. Each time she says she's not ready yet, or that she's trying to figure out what she wants to do. The thing is, she still expects the same lifestyle we had before. She wants us to go out to eat, take small trips, buy new things for the apartment, etc. I've had to say no more and more because the money just isn't there. Last week things finally blew up. I had just come home from work after a long day. I'd actually stayed late to finish a project because my boss hinted that it might lead to a raise later in the year. When I walked in, my wife was on the couch watching a reality show. The sink was full of dishes and there were takeout containers on the coffee table. She asked how my day was, and I said it was exhausting. Then she casually said something like, "You know, I've been thinking, maybe you should try to get a higher paying job. We could really use more money." That comment just hit me the wrong way. I asked her what she meant. She said that a few of her friends' husbands make more than I do, and that maybe I should look for something better or hustle more. I lost it a bit. I told her I'm already working as much as I can, and that if we really need more money, she could also get a job instead of sleeping half the day. She got really upset and said that was a cruel thing to say, and that I'm not supportive of her mental health. I said something like, "It's been 2 years. I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm carrying everything. She ended up crying and went into the bedroom. Since then, she's been giving me the cold shoulder and told one of her friends about the situation. Apparently, the friend thinks I was being insensitive and should apologize. But honestly, I feel like I'm reaching my breaking point. I love my wife, and I don't mind supporting her when she's struggling. But it feels unfair to be told I should make more money while she contributes nothing financially and barely helps around the house. Now I'm wondering if I went too far with what I said. I 3-2M have been married to my wife 30F for 6 years. When we first got together, things were great. We had a normal relationship, good communication, and we were pretty happy overall. Neither of us had ever talked about open relationships before, and honestly, I always assumed we were both on the same page about being monogamous. About a year and a half ago, things started to change. My wife began bringing up the idea of exploring more freedom in relationships. At first it was in a joking way, like when we were watching shows or podcasts where people talked about non-monogamy. She'd say things like, "Some couples make that work," or "I think it's interesting how open some people are." I didn't think much of it until she brought it up seriously one night. She told me she had been reading about open relationships and thought it could be healthy for couples. Her argument was that you could still love your partner, but also explore connections with other people. She said it could make us stronger because we'd be choosing each other rather than feeling restricted. I was honestly shocked. I told her that wasn't really something I'd ever thought about, and that it made me uncomfortable. I asked if she was unhappy with me, or if there was someone else she had in mind. She insisted there wasn't anyone specific. She said she just didn't want to feel like she was missing out on life experiences. For the next few months the topic kept coming up. Every time we talked about it, she would explain how modern relationships are changing and how monogamy isn't natural for everyone. Eventually she said something that stuck with me. She said, "If we can't even talk about this openly, maybe we're not as secure as we think." I'll be honest, that kind of got into my head. I started wondering if I was being closed-minded. I also didn't want to be the reason our relationship failed, if this was something she really needed. After a lot of long conversations, I reluctantly agreed to try an open relationship with some basic rules. At first, she seemed very excited. She went out more often, started dressing up more, and was talking to new people online. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I tried to keep an open mind because I had agreed to it. The thing is, I didn't really have much luck at the beginning. I hadn't dated in years and I wasn't exactly in great shape. I mostly just focused on work and staying busy while she was out. But after a few months I started feeling pretty down about myself. I figured if this was going to be our new reality, I should at least try to improve my own life a bit. So I started going to the gym. At first it was just a way to deal with stress, but I got really into it. I started working out consistently, eating better, and taking better care of myself. Over about 8 months, I lost around 30 pounds and put on a decent amount of muscle. I also started buying better clothes and taking more pride in my appearance. Something unexpected happened. People started noticing. Women at the gym would talk to me. Co-workers started complimenting my appearance, and I eventually downloaded a couple dating apps just to see what would happen. To my surprise, I started getting a lot of matches. Eventually, I started going on a few casual dates. Nothing super serious, but it was nice to feel wanted again. I was always honest about the fact that I was in an open relationship. Meanwhile, things weren't going as well for my wife as she expected. At first, she had some success meeting people, but over time the attention slowed down. She would sometimes complain that guys only wanted something casual, or that they would stop replying after a while. Then she started noticing how much attention I was getting. She saw messages popping up on my phone and overheard me talking to someone, was planning to meet for coffee. She also noticed that women sometimes approached me at the gym when we went together. That's when her attitude completely changed. About 2 weeks ago, she sat me down and said she thinks the open relationship was a mistake. She said it's making her feel insecure, and that she misses how things used to be. She asked if we could close the relationship and go back to being exclusive. I told her I'd think about it. But the truth is, I'm conflicted. For over a year, I struggled with this situation because it was something she pushed for. I adjusted to it, improved myself, and eventually started enjoying the freedom that came with it. Now that the dynamic has shifted and I'm the one getting attention, she suddenly wants to go back to monogamy. When I told her I wasn't ready to close the relationship yet, she got really upset. She said I'm being petty in trying to punish her for suggesting it in the first place. From my perspective, though, I feel like I finally adapted to the situation she created. Now she's barely speaking to me and says I'm ruining our marriage by refusing to go back to how things were. Some of our friends think I should just agree if it will save the relationship. Others think it's unfair that she wants to change the rules now that things aren't going her way. So now I'm genuinely wondering, AITA for refusing to close the open relationship that my wife insisted on in the first place. I'm 35 meters and my wife, Melissa, is 33F. We were together for almost 8 years and married for 5. From the outside, people always thought we were the perfect couple. Nice apartment, good jobs, always posting smiling photos together on social media, going to events, dinners, and vacations. The truth is that most of that image existed because Melissa was extremely obsessed with how people perceived her. When I first met Melissa, I thought her attention to detail was just part of her personality. She liked dressing well, keeping the apartment neat, and hosting dinners for friends. I didn't see anything wrong with that. I even admired how organized she was. But over time I realized it went way deeper than that. Melissa constantly worried about what other people thought of her. Not just occasionally, constantly. If we were going to a friend's party, she would spend hours stressing about what to wear and asking me things like, "Do you think Anna will judge me if I wear this? Or do you think people think we're boring because we didn't travel this year?" At first I tried to reassure her. I'd tell her that people weren't analyzing our lives as much as she thought. But the older we got, the worse it became. Social media made everything worse too. Melissa would spend huge amounts of time curating posts. If we went out to dinner, she didn't want to eat until she got the perfect picture. If we went on vacation, half the trip was spent trying to get photos that looked good online. I started feeling like I was part of a performance rather than a real relationship. There were times when we would be arguing about something serious, and then she would suddenly stop because we were about to meet friends, and she didn't want anyone to think we were having problems. One time stands out in particular. About 2 years ago, I lost my job unexpectedly. The company I worked for downsized, and my entire department was cut. I was pretty stressed about it and honestly a little embarrassed. Instead of focusing on helping me figure out the next step, Melissa's main concern was what we would tell people. She said things like, "Maybe don't mention that you got laid off. People might think you did something wrong. And what if our friends think we're struggling financially?" I remember sitting there thinking, why does that matter right now? I needed emotional support, but she was focused on our image. Over time, I started feeling more and more disconnected from her. Whenever I tried to talk about real issues in our relationship, she would brush it off or say things like, "Why are you making everything negative?" Or other couples would kill to have the life we have. The thing is, we looked happy, but we weren't. A few months ago, things reached a breaking point. We were invited to a big birthday party for one of Melissa's friends, Anna. It was going to be a pretty fancy event at a rooftop bar. Melissa spent almost an entire week planning her outfit and talking about who would be there. That same week, I had been trying to talk to her about how distant we had become. We barely spent real time together anymore, unless it was something social. Every time I brought it up, she said something like, "Can we not do this right now? I'm already stressed about the party." Finally, the night before the event, I told her we really needed to talk. I said I felt like our marriage had become more about appearances than about us actually being happy together. I told her I felt lonely, even though we lived in the same apartment. Her response honestly shocked me. Instead of addressing what I said, she got upset and said, "Why would you bring this up right before Anna's party?" Now I'm going to look miserable tomorrow. That was the moment something just clicked in my head. I realized that even during a serious conversation about our marriage, her biggest concern was how she would look at a party. The next day, we went to the event anyway. Melissa was smiling, laughing, taking pictures with everyone, acting like everything was perfect. At one point, someone even said, "You two look so happy together." Melissa smiled and said, "We really are." I remember standing there feeling like a prop. A few weeks later, I told Melissa I wanted to separate. She was completely shocked, not because I had been unhappy, I had told her that many times, but because she said she had no idea things were this serious. Her first question wasn't about how I felt. Her first question was, "What are we going to tell people?" That honestly confirmed everything for me. I moved out about a month ago and I'm currently staying with a friend while I figure out my next steps. Melissa has been messaging me saying I'm overreacting and that every couple has issues. She also keeps mentioning how embarrassing this situation is and how people are asking questions. Some of our mutual friends think I should have tried harder to work things out. Others say they always noticed how obsessed Melissa was with appearances. But part of me wonders if I gave up too quickly. So now I'm asking strangers on the internet, AITA for leaving my wife because she cared more about what people thought of her than about what was actually happening in our marriage.